Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Kosturik, and my global action plan will be focusing on developmental disabilities and how we can create jobs for people who are born and grow up with these different disabilities. So first off, I'm just going to explain to you briefly what I will be talking about for the rest of my presentation. So what is my global action plan? The broad goal of my global action plan is to obtain jobs and career paths for individuals who are born with developmental delays. So this will be done through workshops that focus on life skills, budgeting, resume writing, mock interviews, and the value in a first impression. My personal connection. So last year, I went on an international service project to Mongolia. And while I was there, we did a lot of different things, but my biggest takeaway was from volunteering in an orphanage. So while I was there, I volunteered with small children who had malnourishment issues, and also adolescents between the ages, I'd say 5 to 18, who had very severe forms of cerebral palsy. So this kind of group of people really impacted me the most, mostly because I couldn't imagine myself living with such hard-pressed developmental disabilities without the comfort or support of my parents. As well, I got to dress these people, feed them, go to therapy with them, so I really got an insight into what their daily life may be like, and I just couldn't imagine myself putting myself in their shoes and seeing what it would be like to be them. So I had a huge desire to give back when I came home, and I had a realization that the problems that exist in Mongolia also exist in my community here in Oakville. Obviously, there's tons of people who have cerebral palsy among other developmental issues, so I knew I could make a difference right here in Oakville. Here's some background information. In the 1950s, there was a stigma against Down syndrome. So doctors recommended that these children be institutionalized. By institutionalized, I mean forcibly put in a facility against their own will. An example, the first institution was called Aurelia, Asylum for Idiots, and it was opened in the mid-1800s. There was recently an expose about what the doctors actually did to these children. So they were physically and sexually abused and really taken advantage of and manipulated in these institutions. The best example I can give you, for example, they would rip out with pliers their teeth because they were in fear that these people would bite them while they were feeding them or going to therapy with them or something. So I just found that really shocking in my research. So Ontario ran 16 institutions similar to Aurelia. That just shows the magnitude of how horrible and horrendous this problem was and how many people were actually institutionalized. Some more background information. There's a lot of socioeconomic issues that come with having a developmental disability. There's positive correlation between poverty and those who struggle with a disability. So if you take a look at this gap, it kind of shows the people who are below the poverty line. ODSP stands for Ontario Disability Support Program, and OW stands for Ontario Works. Both of these are publicly funded support programs that give financial aid to the people who struggle with developmental disabilities. People who are in Ontario Works are waiting to be granted benefits by ODSP. So Ontario Works is actually a temporary support program, and they receive roughly half of the income that ODSP support earners earn. So that's why ODSP is 34% below, while those on Ontario Works are roughly double below the poverty line than ODSP. So there is a huge need for my gap. Sheltered workshops are closing down because there's just not enough money to sustain them. Many of you are wondering what a sheltered workshop is. A sheltered workshop's a supervised workplace for physically disabled or mentally handicapped adults. So I have a photo of one. Basically, they are just kind of like a social setting for people to do pretty easy tasks. For example, they would assemble an object or package some sort of thing in kind of an assembly line, and they actually get paid for this, which is really good. But unfortunately, it's closing down. So the people who are currently in these jobs will be losing their jobs. And the one, there's one on Wycroft behind Community Living, and that one's actually being shut down like next year. So leaving a lot of people jobless. So there's not enough funding for staff to help find individuals jobs. And these individuals obviously can't find jobs because they need some guidance and they don't have the mental brain capacity to go out on their own and find themselves jobs. There's little spacing in day programs. Later on in my presentation, I'll be talking about community living and STEP, also known as skills training to enable personal progress. These are two kinds of day programs that Appleby works closely with. For example, we go on Tuesdays to community living to run activities with them and games, and then on Wednesdays we go with STEP to Tim Hortons to socialize and talk about our lives and just kind of offer companionship. And unfortunately, to be in one of these programs, there's a really long application process and a huge wait list. So a lot of people who want to be on these programs can't be in them just because there's such a high demand for them. And parents cannot financially and mentally cope. Obviously, as their children are getting older, they're getting older, and they can't physically support. They probably find it hard to support themselves, so how are they going to support their physically disabled child if they can't support themselves? It's just a really hard balance. And I showed you the photo of the sheltered workshops, and that's me with Tyler, who is part of community living. So my global action plan. So I created 2 objectives so I can help create my goals. My step 1, so create a partnership with an organization. So Community Living Oakville is the organization I created a partnership with. I did this through my co-curricular, my winter co-curricular, so that's where I met an Appleby parent, Steph Butcher, and then she introduced me to all the people at Community Living and the different people that I should be in touch with. So I made a really good connection with them. And as well, I need to start thinking about my next 4 years. So I recently accepted McGill University for post-secondary education, and I'm looking into creating partnerships with different organizations in Montreal, and I've already found some really great ones, but I'm just kind of deciding which ones would align best with me and my values. So I'm not sure about that yet, but I'm still working on that. Step 2 is developing a program curriculum. So we had a workshop where Miss Wyatt came in and she introduced kind of a how-to on how to create a lesson plan or sort of a workshop for young people, I guess. And so I really took a lot from this, and I am working on designing a lesson plan that demonstrates potential growth. So the mediums I would use: PowerPoints, workbooks, fun and engaging activities. I really like the idea of workbooks because it's kind of like a take-home activity, so it promotes that the learning doesn't really stop in the classroom and that it can be used outside of the workshops, and that people can take it home and do stuff at home, I guess, and learn from it. And I'd also would need volunteers. So volunteers being people who are able to work with extremely vulnerable people and who would be able to mitigate certain situations and who are sensitive to the needs of the participants in this program. Here's a look at my 5-year timeline. So year 1, I would say I achieved my goals in year 1. So develop a relationship between myself and partnering organization. I've done that. And then develop the curriculum that is to be implemented in the community. So I'm working on that right now. And I've realized how difficult and how taxing it could be to create this kind of program. So I'm sort of in the process of that right now, which I hope to be done next year. So the rest of my years will be me studying at university. So I'll just highlight some important things in my 5-year timeline. So I need to make sure my program is sufficient and approved by organizations and passes like legal permissions, making sure it's available to everyone. And in year 3, I would like to see that relationship with my partnering organization is strong and that there's demand for the program and that results are starting to show and that participants are succeeding in my program. And in year 4, I would like a survey to be conducted about my program to see if it's effective for their participants, and that I would also like to alter and adapt the program depending on what they would want from the results of my survey. And year 5, keeping in contact with the program and its participants to monitor progress and fixing hiccups in the program with partnering organization and making changes based on feedback. So that's just like a very quick look at my timeline over the next years. Obviously in my essay kind of thing, I wrote all about my 5-year timeline. It's very like descriptive and detailed, so this is just kind of a summary of what I'd like to do. Progress and challenges. So I talked about this obviously earlier, my relationship with community living through my co-curricular and pitching my global action plan. And I've gotten correspondence with the job placement coordinator at CLO. So she's already kind of running something similar to what I will want to be doing. So she's pairing people from STEP into jobs like Tim Hortons and McDonald's and things like that. So I actually got to meet with her at Tim Hortons, where one of the people in STEP was just started their job. So I was just kind of seeing like what she was doing, helping them integrate them into their job. So I like really got a sense of like what I would want to be doing, and like and this kind of ties in with my third point. She asked me if I wanted to volunteer with her there on like a very regular basis, but I had to say no because obviously she wanted me to volunteer like during like from like, for example, like 4 to like 8 o'clock, which kind of like cut into my time here at Appleby and my co-curriculars and like my study time. So basically, I really learned a lot of lessons from this. Like saying no is difficult in making connections with partnering organizations because I didn't want to like sever my ties with CLO, but I also wanted to stay committed to volunteering with her in the organization. So being aware of time management, I found is really important when making connections. Here's a risk analysis chart I made for working with these kind of people. Okay, so I'm just going to touch upon 3, the ones that I find most important. Number 1, the vulnerables. The people I'll be working with are like extremely vulnerable. So physically, being able to ensure safety to both the volunteers and participants is really important. So to mitigate this, preventative teaching and preventative preparation for volunteers need to be enacted. Obviously, stigma. This is a pretty high likelihood that there's a stigma attached to people who have developmental disabilities and will be working in a job. So awareness in communities to help open the minds of potential employers and other employees in the work setting is like extremely important in making people aware that there are people with developmental issues in the workplace. I said that was really important in creating just an emotionally safe space for these people who are working in these jobs. And obviously workplace abuse and personal safety of participants. So set immediate rules and regulations that need to be followed beforehand along with consequences. So making sure that the job is physically safe and that hours are not too taxing, for example, making sure that they're not working all day without a break, because obviously this is extremely like tiring and something that these people can't really mentally handle. So making sure that there's a set of rules in order for these people to be successful in their jobs. So thank you everyone for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And I should have mentioned at the beginning that, of course, this is part of the culmination of a lot of work that students have done over the years. This presentation, the report that they've done, the course that we do, and also, as you wonderfully mentioned, things like service projects and other things. So thank you for reminding me to mention
Thank you.
I wanted to open this to questions from panel members. And then if we have time, I'll be able to open it more widely as well.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, can I start?
Please, please.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Lauren, that was
Thanks.
great. Personally, just statement first, your connection to the issue is very, very clear, and your ability to take a look at a global issue from one of your trips and bring it back to your local community is also quite impressive, so that's awesome. My question to you is around some of the challenges you might face, which you've identified, but just to get a better sense of how you're going to tackle them. So obviously, sort of, people power is really important to this, right?
Yeah.
Getting volunteers to fill in those gaps. You've identified some of the challenges you, as an individual, have faced, is figuring out, when can I do this? I have all of these other responsibilities. So what are some of your thoughts about how you can sort of tackle that challenge to encourage and make volunteers more accessible to these people, and also without thinking, I can't do this, I don't have time to do this?
Wait, so can you just clarify your question?
Sure.
Really?
So if you're trying to bring on volunteers,
Yeah.
how are you going to market to them that this is actually something that they can do and fit into their lives without it being too much and taking away from other responsibilities?
Well, I envision like the workshops not being like too long, and for example, kind of like maybe a night class like once a week. For example, like Wednesday from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So I feel like it's not something that would cut into the daily lives of these volunteers. So for example, they can still go to, like, do their job or do other things during the day, and then at night there would be some sort of workshop lesson, and it would be like, for example, a consecutive 7-week program where every lesson there would be something new. So I feel like it would accommodate both the participants and the volunteers so that both would be available to do this. And of course, the participants would also probably have stuff going on during their day, so I feel like kind of like a night class would open up a lot of availability to both parties.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. That was great.
Thanks.
Is it your experience maybe working with this sort of vulnerable group that being able to make a living, is that to be able to be more self-sufficient, or to maybe get off some sort of subsidy, or is it more of a sense of self-worth that you're trying to give to this group?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think that with self-sufficiency becomes like a sense of like self-worth and self-purpose. If they're able to do stuff on their own, I feel like they'll get like a huge sense of like self-worth and like pride within themselves that they're able to take with them to the workplace.
Can I do a follow-up question on that?
Yeah.
Are many of the people then that you work with, say at Community Living, are they part of the subsidized home group, or are many of them living with maybe parents? Is that
Some of them are and
okay.
some of them aren't.
Okay.
I think it also depends on how like severe their situation is. Some of them have like caretakers full-time that live with them, and then some of them live with their parents. So it really just depends on like their individual needs and also like financial needs.
I have a super easy question just for clarification, because we talked about this just before you started, but the pictures that you showed, did you have permission to show them?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I was always impressed with Lauren. She was always able to do stuff and very active in approaching and very successfully in tackling all kinds of questions, and never thinking about all the issues in the sense that might impede or stop her in doing that. So in a very positive manner. When we think about these organizations that you have come in touch with, do you focus on a very specific group of organizations where you could help people, or for example, you because you might move from McGill to other places and so on, you might want to connect, and what type of organizations could eventually help you connecting throughout Canada and even internationally
Yeah.
in that regard.
Yeah, I think my program's like pretty versatile, so it's able to connect to not just like community living and stuff, but to also other parts of the world. So when I'm talking about like my 5-year plan and like going to McGill next year, I really envision myself like bringing my program over there too. So it's not just community living and stuff. That's kind of like where I got my start with it, but I also like want to carry it with me to where I'll be for the next 4 years.
Ask one more.
Sure.
Is that
it's-
okay?
that's-
It made me think, Dr. Panev. So, have you considered targeting some of these workshops for, let's say, schools that already have, like White Oaks, for example, has a life skills program, which they're sort of preemptively trying to prepare students that have challenges
Yeah.
for gaining employability skills, so that when they do get into the workforce, when they get a little bit older, they're already equipped with some of this stuff, rather than being a little bit more reactive. Is that something that you can see yourself as like going to local schools that may not have a program like that and teaching them how to?
Yeah, right now I feel like my target's just kind of things like community living and like more organization based rather than like schools. But like as like my 5 years go on, like I feel like that could definitely like be a potential option for me to pursue.
So just to come to feed on that, so thank you very much for that. But when you think about that, is there a possibility that this to become not only just something that you do on that service basis, but to make it and grow it bigger, where you could be involved more on a larger scale and more of your time as almost as a part-time job or something like that?
Yeah, I think in terms of like what I want to do after I graduate, I feel like I'm like really passionate about like social issues and all of that kind of stuff. So I definitely like see myself kind of working more full time on something like this. So yeah, like in terms of like what I want to do after university, I think I could really integrate my global action plan like with what I want to do with my life.
One comment, I mean, we've talked about this, but just something to consider too would be things like possible training that you might need further to what you've done for community living in order to be able to make sure that you have as much expertise working with a vulnerable sector. We've also chatted about, have you noticed when you were looking at organizations in Montreal, if you can find ones that are bilingual,
Yeah.
French only, or English speaking only too. And some of those things will be of relevance, but potentially thinking about training for your volunteers and training for yourself, both from a legal perspective, from a, being able to secure liability in some of those things, but also just to make sure that you have as much expertise as possible when you're developing the curriculum, to make sure that you have all the bases covered.
Yeah, I'm lucky because Montreal's like obviously a city that does like speak a lot of English. So like I was able to find a lot of English-based organizations in Montreal. So because like it's such a big city, I found that's like one of like the benefits of being in Montreal. That there's a lot of like different options.
Definitely, but still consider training for yourself.
Yep.
That's what I would say, so, yeah. Any other questions? Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.